I'm not 100% sure if this video or what I'm going to say has been said already, but since I'm here because everyone told me to keep making more videos, I hope you at least enjoy my voice as I ramble about a game that I wish I liked more. So, hit it, Chief. For anyone that didn't tune in to the last video, and I wouldn't blame you, I have played a lot of Elden Ring, too much in fact, and whatever judgment I will lay on it doesn't exclude from the fact that it's still a really good, creative, and fun video game that probably kicks the ass from anything Ubisoft has put out in the last couple decades. But much like the student in high school that keeps scoring decent 8s and 9s without effort, you're bound to focus on them since you really know if they tried just a little harder, they could score a perfect 10, but they just coast on doing the least amount of work possible. Elden Ring does so many things great that when combined together make it one of the best games to come out since whenever the last Dark Souls was, but I said it does things great and not perfect, and that's my issue here. They're just shy of brilliance, and it feels that From Software is just coasting on their success, making a polished regurgitation of their previous titles rather than something truly innovative. Because no matter how much people might argue about it, this is Dark Souls again. Even the story feels like a remix of things they've done before, throwing the typical Dark Souls setting and slapping it with a twist of Bloodborne where everything is influenced by spooky alien gods, and there's also a waifu doll that everyone seems about. You get the point. So, the more I kept playing the game, the more this dread kept creeping up on me that I was just playing the same thing over and over again, and it just leaves a bitter taste on me that Elden Ring wasted so much effort on being reiterative rather than innovative. Take the world for example. So many reviews and gamers out there have praised Elden Ring for having a rich and expansive open world that encourages exploration, and it's unlike anything gamers have ever played before. And you know what? For the first initial hours of playing, I would agree with them too. It's the fact that the more you discover, the more everything starts looking the same. I really feel like if you fully explore Lingrave and the Weeping Peninsula, you've played the rest of the game already. Because everything else after it is just the same with a different coat of paint. Don't believe me? In this starting area, you will find the following: a bunch of encampments and a group of enemies patrolling a road so that the open world feels less empty that provide an interest in combat opportunities. One of those encampments will lead to an underground boss with the same copy-pasted arena. A bunch of mines that lead to a natural form cave or man-made gallery that will end in a boss fight that will send you back to the entrance. A bunch of catacombs filled with skeletons or statues or both that end in a boss fight that will send you back to the entrance. A completely optional semi-legacy dungeon that is important for a sub-story that ends in a boss fight. A bunch of ever jails that feature a boss fight of what will become a regular enemy later on. A giant walking mausoleum that always features the same way of bringing it down. A giant golden tree with a true shit boss fight. A dragon boss fight in an open area of the map. A magic tower that is locked under a vague puzzle hint. A number of merchants selling goods. A fort-like structure that will feature an important quest item. A Nazgul on a horse that only appears at night. And finally, a legacy dungeon that signifies the end of the area, with a boss fight that will drop a remembrance that you can exchange for items. It's kind of incredible how much of this list will just get repeated over and over again for each of the regions of the game. And while at the start you will be so amazed that you discover a cave under a crevice in between cliffs, by the seventh time you do it and you are somehow fighting the same enemies and the same boss with just more health, it really makes you wonder, are those comments about the game having a great sense of exploration any valid? Yes, you might be doing exploration since you are looking with your goddamn eyeballs instead of following a marker on the UI, but when the result of your exploration is the same copy-pasted content, how is this any different from the checkpoint and tower climbing of Ubisoft games? People hated when Bloodborne introduced the AI generated randomized chalice dungeons, and this feels just the same, except this time around they wasted the hours of an intern copy pasting around the same catacomb textures, dragging and dropping the same fucking imp statues on the walls so they can suddenly jump on you for the 87th time. These were the same people that we praised for great world and level design back in Dark Souls 1, and we have reached a point where the game feels like a formality that asks none of your sense of exploration, but a deep appreciation of the Elden Ring wiki that will tell you about the one cave or catacomb that you missed that had something interesting going on for once. They pandered to the audience so much this time, making it the biggest game they have ever done yet so everyone can get their fill of more Dark Souls, but at the cost of reaching a new area and finding the same fucking dude soldier from Lingrave, but this time it's painted in blue, red, or gold, and it has X amounts more health than the first one. I wish I could be a fly in the wall in the meeting room when a From Software executive went, "What if Dark Souls, but Breath of the Wild?" And they started building the game from there. Just replace the repetitive puzzles and combat shrines of Zelda with the repetitive caves and catacombs from Elden Ring, and add a focus on visual exploration thanks to a map that is big enough that you have to find where you want to go, and it also lets you put a marker on it that will be visible in game with a beacon of color light. Now featuring a crafting system and undercooked stealth crouching gameplay straight from every survival game, which you are never incentivized to use since the two most useful items in the game still recover every time you rest in the bonfire, Grace. All of this for the legacy dungeons to be all visually stunning, but mechanically uninteresting, with the same castle or palace layout and vertical design featuring doors that don't open from this side, with choke points of enemies that more than ever feel put there because they have to, rather than because they create meaningful combat encounters, making this feel like a parody of what people used to praise about the original Souls. How can I feel engaged with these amazing looking places when down to the core it's all just microwave pizza from the day before? So many people have praised From Software for making Elden Ring the open world Souls game that everyone was waiting for, and it leaves me thinking, is this really what we wanted? The original Dark Souls was already an open world exploration game, but it was designed in a way where everywhere you go was a new experience, and maybe that's the deal. It wasn't an open world in the eyes of the gamers, since it wasn't a huge map filled with lots of droplets of the same repetitive gameplay. While I play Elden Ring, I no longer feel like I'm exploring a strange and interesting unforgiving world, but rather like I am going down a checklist of stuff I need to do before I move to the next area. I'm going to ask you something, and I hope some of you will catch the reference. What is the difference between A, going through a complex but interconnected world with amazing level design and unique boss fights, and B, going through a huge open world peppered with small chunks of gameplay and repeated boss fights that sometimes lead to a complex but interconnected level with good design and a unique boss fight? Answer: 80 hours and a horse. You would think that if so much of the world design is this repetitive copy-pasted design that probably required much less dev time than previous games, that must mean that all the effort went into creating the best combat and bosses ever, right? Right? I would say that Elden Ring's combat is hectic and full of action, with an engaging but punishing difficulty that leaves you wanting for more. I would say that, but we are not in 2016 anymore. That seems to be where the combat wants to be stuck on, considering they lifted everything from Dark Souls 3, including their obsession of making the lightning in a bottle of the Artorias boss fight strike again and again and again, while completely forgetting what made it such an interesting boss fight in the first place. It's kind of impressive, really. So much work has been put on adding features and mechanics to the combat, like weapon arts, dual wielding, jump attacks, shield counters, staggers, and probably a dozen other things more. And the most effective means of fighting a boss is still to sword and board, dodge and poke, or to shoot magic pebbles at the enemy. Bowmains, I hope you're still watching, but you're probably still trying to beat the Capra Demon in Dark Souls, let's be honest. And if you say, oh, but my build used X weapon art or X magic spell that were really unique, I hope you catch yourself speaking in the past tense because From Software probably nerfed it already. Some introductions even feel like replacements of another one that existed already, For the people that love the dodge and poke gameplay, I sure hope you like using two katanas instead of one, or instead of using a great sword, now you can jump attack every enemy with two great swords. And as for magic users, you better have muted the game and played some Spotify on the background, because otherwise I hope you enjoy going to bed and still hear the sound of the glintstone pebble in the silence of the night. This is the Souls game with the most amount of spells and whatever faith people use, and somehow they all come down to shoot ball at enemy with different numbers, sizes, and colors of balls so you can find the right balls for you, which is pointless since the starting spell of the game will be the one thing you keep using throughout the game, except for the times that the enemies and bosses read your inputs to dodge your spells, in which case you might have to bring the 3 big rocks spell to mix things up. Never mind the fact that the effects and sounds of the spells are still just as anemic and bland as always, which is funny when not so long ago Bluepoint fucking nailed it when remaking From Software's own game. I want to feel like a mage that can channel the power of the elements around me, not like a nerd shooting flying LED lights at the enemy. And just like with the weapon nerds, if you ever had a spell or incantation that wasn't just pebbles, I hope you got to enjoy it before history repeated itself. Why can't we have more interesting armor sets that actually change the way we play? Why do you even give stats to the armor and all these calculations since you are still going to get hit for stupid amounts of damage anyway? Why even keep shields when you clearly build most bosses to be this constant onslaught of attacks that will break your stamina? Wouldn't it be better if we had more agency, if the armor we pick, the rings and talismans that we choose, actually influence more how we play the game? Dark Souls 1 had a rinse that changed the rolling into a flip and the world didn't collapse. It's incredible how dense these stats and numbers are for this game for all of it to mean absolutely nothing. The combat mechanics of this game used to be the tits with fries back when the games were a set of mostly linear levels, with optional paths united all between bonfires, which made the Estus Flask resource management, an actual thing to do. Now, with the easy availability of races everywhere, the open world letting you just plop back into any given race at any time, and the combat encounters being entirely optional, you're only ever forced to think about your healing and magic flask whenever you are in a legacy dungeon. Not only that, but enemy placement has also been affected negatively by the open world design, meaning that every enemy not in a dungeon has to be able to face you from whichever side you are coming from. And what even is the point since you can just run past them, and more often than not, they will just stand there staring at you like a cow in a field. And the legacy dungeons are just more of what we've seen before. Are we really supposed to be impressed when a guy throws a bomb into some explosive barrels that are in our vicinity? Are we supposed to be amazed when you do it 3 times within the same room? Most of the time, enemies will just be there waiting for you to fight them. Just corridor after corridor, maybe leading to an open area that leads to another corridor. There is no intention of creating complex and interesting mechanics within these dungeons. I know it might seem video gamey, but is it really the peak of design to just plaster enemies around so we can just fight and fight constantly? Is that all there is to do for the 100 hours you're supposed to be playing the game? Since they clearly took some inspiration from Breath of the Wild for this game, why not also look at how the Divine Beast dungeons are built? Dungeons don't have to be just this area where you put enemies and a boss at the end. Make it more dynamic. Give me something that I haven't seen before. For as much as people hate it, and with reason, I think Bloodborne's all-seeing eye tower is a great concept but with terrible execution. An area where you carefully have to tread and be mindful of the environment more than just where are the enemies. The concept is great, and From Software thinks so too, because in Dark Souls 3, in the Undead Settlement, there's a giant in a tower that will shoot huge arrows at you or your enemies. With careful coordination, you can take advantage of this to kill a big group of enemies with a single arrow. Do you understand my point? you can do so much more than just another castle with enemies in it, because what we end up with is most of the encounters feeling just like a thing to do in between bosses, and honestly, those aren't great either. Bosses in Elden Ring are either some kind of disability access, because I struggle to believe someone has died to the Tibia Mariner, but Pinwheel was a thing in Dark Souls, so might as well. Some of them are actually reasonably fun fights, and then we have the hyper-aggressive Artorias Genichiro of the Lady Ludwig revivals, and honestly, I think in their constant pursuit of creating the ultimate boss fight to beat the ones from the previous games, they have really missed the point here. For example, Maliketh, the Artorias knockoff that goes so far as to also be in a coliseum. This furry baby will spin, jump, throw projectiles, slam into the ground, and jump away into a pillar, only to repeat the same shit without any kind of regard of what you're doing in the fight. It really feels like you are a bystander to the action, rather than being engaged with the enemy. And you see all these people commenting like this is one of the best boss fights in the game, and my god, if I have to be rude to people, but just because you died a lot of times to a boss doesn't make it a good one. Good boss design is all about you learning the enemy and reacting accordingly until you can drop them to zero health. Artorias was a fast boss for the game that he was in, but he was fast in relation to the player. He still had enough visual cues and timing to let you react accordingly to every attack, but so many of Elden Ring's bosses will just spam attacks and jump around at random, and I feel like we are confusing this hyper aggressiveness with the fast paced combat of Bloodborne. Bosses and combat in Bloodborne were fast because you, the player, were fast, so bosses move accordingly to you. They still had attacks with Visual Tails, and even Ludwig didn't jump around as much. Now we just have bosses that will constantly stagger their attacks or hang in the air until they hit Death of the Universe, completely breaking the flow of the game, but then they hit you with the Cuomo Combo special, and honestly, I did not have that great of a time with them. Bosses used to be challenging, but now they seem to be designed to be flashy and cool looking and hard to farm clicks and generate talk about the game rather than being actually good fights. And don't you dare say that just use summon asses or just summon someone else to help you or to get good. You're missing the fucking point here. And you know that you like good boss fights because when other games don't follow the rules of good engagement, you notice it and you hate it. The whole summoning system is a great idea and concept, don't get me wrong, but it takes away from so much of the game. Why are you even playing if you're just going to use the goddamn mimic tier to play the game for you? What's the point of doing the bosses then, if you're going to do nothing but shoot pebbles from a safe distance, or just hit them while they are focused on your clone? Its only good feature is that now everyone can finish the game, and if accessibility is what you care about, yes, this is going to be the FromSoft game you like. But the price we paid for was FromSoft's most cheap roster of bosses to date. Bosses that will read your inputs just to seem more difficult than they actually are, or you get hit by attacks that you can't even dodge. Just mitigate the damage if you somehow found a very specific item that you might not even know about. It confuses me honestly, because on one hand they give you Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, a boss fight that feels classic in its design, and unsurprisingly has a lot of people saying it is the most enjoyable one of the bunch. But you don't even have to go so far, since one of the best designed bosses of the game is waiting for you when you first step into Limgrave. The Tree Sentinel, or the fucking Tree Sentinel if you haven't beat him, feels like a masterclass on how to create a boss within the framework of the Souls game's combat. He's challenging and difficult, but he's not cheap or cheating in the ways that he fights. He has big telegraph attacks, which means you can predict what kind of attack you will have to dodge depending on the animation previous to the attack. He's aggressive, but not to an insulting degree, which means that when he has done 2 to 3 attacks, you will have enough time to punish him, unlike other Elden Ring bosses that will almost immediately start a new group of attacks before you have the time to hit back or recover your stamina. You can shield from most attacks, but he will sometimes bash you with the shield or the horse, and those attacks have greater stamina drain than the halberd, meaning you have to be proactive and read what attacks you must dodge if you're playing defensively. Not only that, but he doesn't delay any of his attacks, which I get that some people might enjoy since it might feel like the boss is deceiving you, but to me it just breaks the pace of the combat. The best boss fights in From Software games feel like a dance between the boss and the player, so adding fake delays on attacks breaks that rhythm since you don't naturally know when it's supposed to hit, and you more often than not end up getting hit since if for example Mergit puts up his cane in the air and just stands there menacingly, how are you supposed to know when it's coming down since there is no tell? And this is not to say there can't be charging animations. The tree sentinel will oftenly throw back with his horse to charge up a swing, and it doesn't break the pace of the fight, since visually you can feel when the hit is coming for you. And the best of all about the tree sentinel, he's an engaging fight for both range or in melee, since he will pull a no you card with his shield for any spells coming his way, which means for magic users, you cannot just spam him. You actually have to look out for the shield reflect, meaning however approach you take, you will have an enjoyable fight that tests your skills. And with all that careful thought put into one of the optional bosses of the start of the game, we then have the Elden Beast, the actual final boss of the game. And my god, what a mess. They still haven't figured out how to make giant bosses fun to fight, and it's a damn shame. While fighting the giant translucent dildo beast, you will be fighting the boss, the camera, and all the sparkle missile tracking attacks that can and will hit you. Elden Beast is hard not because it challenges you in a fair way, but because it breaks so many of the conventions of what makes a good fight. He moves around for long periods of time where you can't hit him. He constantly uses magic missiles that explode into more missiles that don't telegraph very well when it comes to dodging. Getting close to him means you cannot see what attacks he is doing, and so on and so on. And this is not just the Elden Beast, as the Fire Giant suffers from much of the same problems. Even if you fixed most of the problems with big enemies in the game, I feel like they are still a chore to fight. How about you incorporate some different weak points to big enemies that you can exploit, and depending on what parts you break, the boss will stop using certain attacks, making the fight more dynamic. Or maybe you could use the environment to fight the boss, rather than just using yet another open arena. And then I shove up this copy of Monster Hunter up your butt and tell you to stay quiet. But hey, at least they made the giant serpent enemy boss fight into an actual fight this time, rather than Dark Souls 3's spam the Storm Ruler quicktime event. But honestly, even if they got all things right with the bosses and the combat, it would just mean the game is as good as what has come before. Sekiro and Bloodborne have been a different take on their Souls combat that I really appreciate, and Elden Ring should have been up there. There's so much stuff they could have tried to spice things up, and going with an open world, it really feels like they went for the safest choices possible. How about a really big boss that roams around the land, and maybe you have to use the stealth mechanics available to you to hide from it until you can weaken it enough? How about the Legacy Dungeon, where two bosses and their minions are fighting each other, and by helping one side or the other, the boss will actually help you against the other boss? How about the boss fight, where the boss is actually the dungeon, and you have to sneak into it to hurt the core? Look, my point is, after talking for what feels like ages, is that, yes, what we got is probably good enough for most people, but I know they have it in them to surprise us with things we haven't played before. This is the company that created a whole new genre of games that have inspired so many others to follow. And this time around, it feels like they are trying to imitate themselves and playing it safe rather than being the tour de force that gave us many great games. Playing Elden Ring, I was tired of playing the same game I have been playing for almost a decade now. But judging by the record breaking sales of the game, I might be the only one that feels that way about Elden Ring. Have a good day, everyone.